Good afternoon. This is the 15th of June 2022 and this is a third video in a series I'm making on the island and history and culture of Malta, and I'm making a direct comparison with Malta and the planet Earth. I hope you enjoy this video. I've put in as much effort as possible and I hope it will enlighten you in many ways. Malta has seen many changes of rulership and governing bodies over its long history, and it went through a period of unsettlement after the end of the Norman conquest period, and the island was taken over by the Hohenstaufen dynasty, and then shortly after that it was ruled from 1262 to 1409 by the House of Anjou, and during this time it was also sold off to the House of Barcelona. So the northern European powers came to take a greater interest in Malta because of its strategic position, and the eastern Byzantine and North African Barbary coast area, because of civil wars there and pirate raids, had come to a point of disunity and political stagnation. And so the power shifted towards Northern Europe. Then the island was given to the Knights Hospitaller in 1530, and they succeeded in re-establishing Malta as a strongly fortified base. The Ottomans had asked the Knights Hospitaller to leave the island of Rhodos, and I guess they were under compulsion. They sought another base, and so it was an attractive proposition for them. They established a small fleet there, and after some years they started to raid the Ottoman fleet. And they also tried to discourage the Barbary pirates from North Africa, who were also raiding and selling slaves, and this is went on in these days. In 1798, the reign of the Knights Hospitaller ended and the island was taken over by Napoleon. Napoleon was on his way to Egypt at the start of his Egyptian campaign, and he tricked the Knights Hospitaller into giving up the island. Then he apparently freed the slaves, introduced many reforms, introduced public education, and tried to bring Malta into the greater fold of French influence. He was partially successful. Unfortunately for Napoleon, in 1814, the island passed to the British Empire. Malta seems to have thrived under the British Empire, and my guess would be that that was because Malta became even more important strategically, because the British had captured the Suez Canal, and Malta was a staging base and a port of call on the way of ships coming through the Straits of Gibraltar, the old Pillars of Hercules, past Egypt, through the Suez Canal into the Red Sea, and on the way to India. So it became even more important as a strategic base. During the period of 1915 to 1918, during the First World War, Malta became part of we would call it a rest and recovery centre for British and Allied Commonwealth soldiers. They were sent to Malta, and there many hospitals were established to help their recovery. Many of them were suffering from injuries due to gas attack, and so Malta became a centre for recovery, and apparently also for pioneering certain operations to help soldiers in their road to recovery. During the period of 1940 to 1944, Churchill realised the importance of Malta as a strategic base, and it became the centre for the Royal Navy's operations in the Mediterranean Sea, later to replaced, I believe, by Alexandria. But Malta still remained one of the main bases, and it was continuously bombed between 1940 and 1944 by the Axis powers. The Italians launched their air raids from Sicily, and the Germans used their various bases around Europe, and also used their aircraft carriers. It was a very bitter fight, because the British Hurricanes were not so successful against the Luftwaffe, and it wasn't until the island's air fleet was replaced by the Spitfires that the fight was more even, and eventually the British held out and recovered. A lot of Maltese civilians died because of the heavy bombing, but the bravery of the islanders was recognised. At the end of the Second World War, Malta was reconstructed. Many Maltese left for Canada, for the United States, for New Zealand. Being part of the British Commonwealth, of course, they were welcomed there. The island itself, though, became, important. In a sense, the Cold War had started, and between Russia and the United States, there was a standoff. The Maltese decided that they would be neutral in this, and they briefly joined the non-aligned movement. In the 21st September 1964, Malta gained independence, and then in 1974, under the leadership of Don Mintoff and the Labour Party, Malta became a republic and wished to be disassociated from the royal family. In 1980, Malta declared its neutrality, as I mentioned, during the Cold War period. And in 1989, a summit was held on the island, and the summit was between Gorbachev and George Bush. And here I think also they were talking about the ET issue. This was, they were aware that there had been an infiltration onto the earth, and that the Nazis had got control of ET technology, and they knew, I guess, they'd spirited it away to their hiding places in various parts of the world, and that the hangover from the Second World War had not been cleared, and my guess is that they decided to come closer together, aware of the threat that the Earth was under, and the fact also that there was some concern over ET infiltration of the various security and military agencies. But I only have a few pointers in this. I don't know the story exactly. In 2004, Malta joined the European Union, and in 2008 it joined the Eurozone. And today Malta plays a fine game against all the neighbouring powers and nations, and the UN agency. It plays a fine game of diplomacy. Malta herself and Gozo, they have problems. They have over 500,000 people, and that expands hugely during the tourist months. They have a shortage of water and land space, and the pollution rates on the island are quite high, so they do have difficulties. And going into the next decade or so, they're going to look for alternatives to alleviate the problems the island's experiencing. Just as the world powers were intervening in Malta, the Maltese would have to negotiate the best deals they could get with the various powers over such a long period of time, and it would have been difficult for them. But I guess I'm thinking they might have got quite skilled at in dealing with oppositional groups and perhaps groups that were not out for their best interests. If you look at the historical record, it seems generally that was the case. Sometimes they were successful, sometimes they managed to play one group off against another, and sometimes they gained their independence. And I guess with each group they tried to take the best the culture could offer. Now we come to our planet Earth, and I've got the good guys near me and the bad guys further away. And I should also at this point make references. Very briefly, yesterday I used this book. It's nicely done. It's published by, let's see, All About History. They have many different titles. So this one, of course, was on Sparta, and it featured a lot of the Greek myths and legends as well, and nicely illustrated, suitable for teenagers. I also used Wikipedia. They have a very excellent entry on Malta, its history and culture and languages. I would also, before I continue, reference some books. Michael Salla's books, the US Navy's Secret Space Program, the US Air Force's Secret Space Program, Rebel Gene by Kerry Cassidy, and Alien Species by Eleanor Danan, which I don't have right in front of me right now, but I'll try to get it before the end of the video. Now, Eleanor went to great detail to describe the races, which we already knew something about these races because it had been in the popular imagination. And I will talk about the benevolent ones first. So she says that there's a group called the Seleuci. They're from Alpha B Centauri, which is just over 4 light years away. It's that system, the Alpha Centauri system, are the nearest stars to ours. And she claims that they are very like us in many ways. They look like us. They've got light skin or tan skin. They have different colours of hair and different eye colour. She says they try to assist us as best they can. Sometimes from behind the scenes, they try to advise governments, they try to advise the military. They are solution oriented, and they gave advice to the various secret agencies on the negative groups who were trying to interfere and disrupt Earth's progress and our progress as a species. She also mentions the Adari people from Vega. Vega is 25 light years distance from us, and she said that they were here during the time when India developed into this most amazing empire. If you think of the Gupta period, the Mauryan period, the stories of the Indian saints and their description of blue-skinned people who had tremendous wisdom, which was carried on into the Mahabharata and the Ramayana and the Upanishad religious writings. Many of you will be familiar with these stories and books. And so this classical Indian culture was derived from another star people, similar to us, darker skin, slightly larger eyed, but full of wisdom. They had a fight with a reptilian group and had to leave this planet, but their offspring survived, and were bred into the Indian population. The human species originated in a star system called K62. It's 990 light years away, and Alex Collier was talking about this in the 1990s. He said that human beings were introduced to this galaxy many millions of years ago, and that the man system, that's again the K62 Kepler system, Kepler 62, was the point of origin for human beings in this galaxy, and that they were doing very well there. They were mostly an agricultural people with some scientific knowledge taught to them by, I guess, other ET beings. However, they were attacked by what he calls the reptilian group, and they were scattered throughout the galaxy, and the reptilian group saw the human beings as a source of food, as a source of slavery. They wanted to control and dominate their wealthy planets in the K62 system. Let's go to the a little bit more on the Seleucids. They also have cousins called Telosi, and the Telosi were the group that started up Atlantis here on planet Earth, along with some other groups, but the Telosi were the main group, and they had a civil war here. Again, there was outside interference from off-world groups. Atlantis was destroyed, but some of the Telosi, close cousins of the Seleuci, survived, and they moved to West Africa and the west coast of Europe, and they moved underground. Now, I'm not sure exactly how they could survive underground. I guess if their science was quite well developed, they could perhaps have artificial sunlight. They could grow food underground under certain conditions. But there's an interesting legend, and especially the Scottish and Irish people will know this. We have a tradition of the Sidhe, that's spelled S-I-D-H-E in the Gaelic. And in my own family, there's this tradition on my mother's side in Argyllshire that the Sidhe make their appearance now and then, and they look like us. In the old days, it was considered good luck. They're also called the fairies, and the Sidhe were wise. And going back to you have the Tolkien and the Lord of the Rings, and you have mythology in the British Isles that King Arthur and his Knights of the Round Table were also approached by the Sidhe and given advice. And of course, Merlin was the go-between, and in the Lord of the Rings, of course, the Gandalf figure is really a copy of Merlin in many ways, and so you have this relationship with another group of human beings who live here on Earth, and again, who in some ways resemble us. Now I'll go on to the malevolent groups. It's not a nice subject, but it's good that the truth comes out. There are a number of malevolent groups. I've mentioned the reptilians. There's also the Greys, and here again I have to thank Ellen Danan. I've used her excellent illustrations. She talks about this one called the Maitre. They have discoidal craft. They are into every nefarious thing you could think about. Cattle mutilations, taking blood, kidnapping people, implanting people, selling people off to other groups. They're very hard-hearted. They're very fierce and aggressive, and I think if an experienced psychologist was to go into their minds and find out what on earth happened to them in their past for them to become so obnoxious and so disturbing. They apparently do not originate in this galaxy. They come from Andromeda. Maybe they were kicked out of there. Who knows? There are other groups of greys. They have the slightly smaller, the Maitre are 7 or 8 feet tall, thin and muscular, but there are smaller ones with big heads. They have the classic grey eyes. These are lenses, apparently, all of them put over their eyes. Again, they tend to be good in science, very technical. They're a very hierarchical society, or a society organized around a hive mind. They lack individuality and creativity. Possibly many of them also have been abused. There are many different subspecies of greys. What is most disturbing for us, if all this is actually true to the core, is that they hybridize humans. So there are some human beings walking around the planet that have their malevolent genetics, they've been hybridized, and it could be that some of our leaders, some of our influential people are not fully human soul, that they're under the soul matrix of the greys or other groups. And of course this goes into all the stories about the Illuminati, the Cabal, who's really human and who's not. I know it can be a little bit of a exaggeration, or it can be sounds a bit wild and possibly just an imaginative fiction. However, for many of us, our instincts think that no, it's true. And at this point, I'd like to offer a counter argument to everything I've been saying, because it's an abstruse subject and it's difficult to get a hold on it. So I'm now going to offer a counter argument to suggest that maybe this is all untrue. The counter argument against the ET infiltration on planet Earth, the counter argument is such that the main writer of this argument, his name is Marshall V. N. Summers, and he and his group are called the Allies of Humanity. He's been writing since the 1990s. He claims that, yes, there are ETs here and there are different groups. However, what they do is they study us over a long period of time and look for our weaknesses. And then they play back our fears and our concerns and exaggerate them. And they pose as our saviors, as like, we're here to help, we're here to make sure you spiritually ascend, we're here to help you to go to the 5th dimension. And he says that this is all just a play. And going back to the history of Malta, I guess at times some of the invading powers would use psychological techniques to win over the population. Napoleon did it when he persuaded the Knights Hospitallers to give up the fight, not to resist. He tricked his way into Valletta Harbour. And so we see this kind of thing happening in our own societies, in our own military confrontations. So Marshall V. N. Summers claims that there's a pacification program underway by the alien groups. They don't want to fight us and they can't really live here, but what they want to do is set up proxies here, and gradually over many hundreds of years they want to establish themselves firmly here. This is his claim. He says, 1, importing ET alien tech on the planet is bad. We should not be using their tech, and we shouldn't be giving them basing rights here, and we should not allow them to work with our scientists and technicians in their bases. He says, signing treaties And trade agreements and protocols with different groups is a mistake, because we lose our independence and our sovereignty. He also says that we are dealing with different groups. We're dealing with some who are purely interested in trade and resource acquisition. Some are federated, not warlike. Others are possibly empires that stretch across vast regions of space. But he claims that warfare in this part of the galaxy has been suppressed and that there are no wars going on. And he claims that, and his students, his son, I think, took over the main operation there, claim that no, there's no vast wars across space. Yes, there may be some cattle mutilations, there may be some kidnapping of people to create hybrids so they can worm their way into our social structures. He says that's true, but he says they don't have large military forces. Now, this is what he claims. It's hard to prove, but let's go further on to his other arguments. He claims ETs like to control trade routes and passages through space. That we've understood, we've talked about that before. He says there's no galactic federation out there. He says the groups who are interacting with don't go much beyond 150 light years, 200 light years. And remembering the galaxy's hundreds and hundreds of light years across. So he says these are really local groups, that you cannot traverse the vast distances of space quickly. He says the idea of traversing wormholes and going into the fifth dimension and jumping back into the third dimension, having travelled across, from another galaxy. He says that doesn't happen. He says it goes against the laws of nature, which we can't break. He also says that we focus in on our ideas, our assumptions, our longings, and they monitor our SF programs. So they'll look at Star Trek, Battlestar Galactica, and then they'll play that back to us as if it's real. Eleanor Danan, who did Alien Races and who has her own private messages, said that she would disagree with Marshall Van Summer's analysis, and she would say that in fact the ETs helped to create a bridge between their time and our time, and to further us in our galactic development by seeding Gene Roddenberry ideas for Star Trek. So of course you have Star Trek, you have on board the USS Enterprise, you have Dr. Spock, who's an alien. He's smart, he's analytical. And you have other groups who appear later on in the later series who are also alien. Some of them negative, some of them positive. The Romulans, for example. And she says that the Galactic Federation of Worlds did this deliberately to nudge us forward to think of the bigger picture of what it's really like out there. So, which one's correct? They can't be both correct. I would suggest that the truth lies somewhere in between the two extremes. And this would mean that any negotiation with off-world powers has to be conducted very carefully, because there may be something of a Trojan horse in their technology. I think basing rights should not be given to ETs on the Earth, and I think the ones that are here should be politely asked to go. Perhaps we could have a neutral base on the moon, where ETs that we think are favourable to us or are helping us out in some way, where we could meet them halfway and do our agreements, If it turns out, and it could well be that the is correct and that Marshall v. Summers is wrong, it would seem that the Galactic Federation have risked a lot to help us. They have taken casualties. So it would only be fair and just if we gave them some leeway. But should we give them basic rights on Earth? I think that's a difficult one. I think it would be best to restrict them to the Moon and Mars, but that's just my perspective. I don't know, obviously, what's going on exactly, but maybe we'll find out. Maybe we need to be a little bit more cautious with their high-tech technology and think not just for 15 years ahead or 50 years ahead. We need to think hundreds of years ahead. Where are we going to be? Are we going to claim our sovereignty? Are we going to be a free people, not dependent on anyone? Are we going to be tough and go into alliances with caution? The Venetians, who were also part of the scene during the Middle Ages in the Mediterranean, they were very tough negotiators, but they were a very successful trading empire. But they wouldn't go into agreements easily. And they became notorious as being, well, smart. They were working for their republic, and they didn't easily give things away. And so it's a case out there in space. The rules of nature haven't changed. And I think that we'll just have to wait and see how things pan out. I hope you enjoyed the video series. I look forward to your questions. Please share. I don't make any money from this. I'm doing it all from my heart. So I hope it will reach as many people as possible. Thank you very much. Have a lovely summer.